We cover all sorts of stuff happening in our public school system because we are going to be a voice for parents, students, and good teachers who are sick of what our public education system has become. Apparently, our colleagues elsewhere in the media are not so interested in being a voice for people who are being, I don't know, left out, who are being hurt from an education perspective by the state of our public school system. So we'll do it. That's fine. A couple weeks ago on the show, we had done a story on, honestly, for us, this is kind of a run-of-the-mill type story. A teacher does something completely inappropriate. A student or a parent lets us know about it. We talk about it on the show. So that was the case. There was a high school teacher in Peninsula High School who apparently was moonlighting as a drag king, which, as you know, wasn't really the issue, right? The issue, as I said on the show, I love drag shows. Like, as an adult, I have attended many a drag show. And if we did a segment every time a teacher was exposed as a drag king or queen, we would probably have to have that be our full-time jobs. So the issue with this was, of course, as we stated very clearly, the vulgar nature of this particular drag king persona and the public-facing social media posts that students found out about. So anyway, we did that story, old news, blah, 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 goes through. Well, this teacher ends up quitting their job. And I think, okay, that's the decision they made. Didn't want to face their students for, who'd found out about their drag king persona, so they quit their job, so be it. But this teacher has also now decided to use the local media as their personal PR team, and it has embarked on this sob story tour amongst whatever local media will have him to come and talk about how, oh my gosh, this conservative host hates trans people and forced me out of my job just because I'm an innocent drag performer, which is obviously ridiculous. So early this morning, if you've seen it on Patreon and Locals, I published a story I want you to go read if you haven't had the time to do it after the show today. The headline, Orgasmic Drag King Convinces Media to Help Him Do Damage Control. Rather than accept any responsibility for having such poor judgment, Kelsey Wayne played the victim and reached out to local news outlets for help. So this started happening, I would say, Thursday of last week. We started getting requests from media outlets to respond to the accusations of the horrible things that we did to this teacher. So the teacher's name is Kelsey Wayne. The drag persona, as you know, is Jack King Goff, the orgasmic drag king. Great. Okay, great. We had done this story, again, not because of the teacher or anything like that, and what the teacher might have done in the classroom, but this obviously inappropriate drag king persona. So around last week, Thursday or so, we started getting all these requests saying, hey, this teacher is saying you've cyberbullied them, you forced them out of a job, et cetera, et cetera. So it started with the stranger on Thursday. And so far, here's the coverage that has happened in this. The Stranger, Cairo 7, the News Tribune, all in the last few days. We also got requests for comment from Real Change News in Seattle, and then I think Cairo radio hosts talked about this. I didn't listen to the segment, I just heard that they talked about it. But when you read these headlines, so again, just these few, you guys know the story, right? So read these headlines. From The Stranger, Drag King dragged out of Peninsula School District. An online bullying campaign and Brandi Kruse segments made teaching impossible. Cairo 7 News, Gig Harbor teacher quits, cites cyberbullying. The News Tribune, Pierce County teacher and drag king resigns from school district amid cyberbullying. So if you just were an average news consumer and you saw one of those headlines, you would think this was about a teacher who just does drag in their free time being bullied and vilified, and then they had to quit their job, and it's this horrible conservative commentator who did this to this poor drag king, which of course is not the case. And what every single one of these stories really failed to capture is the overarching point why this was a segment for us in the first place. I actually think, as I wrote in my story this morning, I think The Stranger did the best job. I mean, I think their story was ridiculous, but they didn't beat around the proverbial bush. They acknowledged that I don't have an issue with drag performers. I have an issue with the vulgar nature of this person's posts, calling themselves an orgasmic drag king named Jack King Off, and posting a variety of other things. But the stranger just doesn't care. The stranger basically said, well, kids aren't being exposed for the first time to masturbation puns. So that's just the stranger being weird, right? The stranger thinks it's perfectly normal for a teacher to have public-facing social media profiles of their alter drag persona, orgasmic drag king, jacking off. So that's fine. The stranger is going to do what the stranger does, but for actual news outlets to buy into this sob story and paint it as like, oh, this poor teacher, it's just because they're trans and do drag, and now they're being vilified by Brandi Kruse. It's ridiculous. So this is from the News Tribune. This is their opening paragraph. An English teacher resigned from their teaching job last week through a mutual agreement with the Peninsula School District after online trolls began attacking their after-hours profession as a drag king on social media. And the information was amplified by a local conservative commentator. Again, nothing in there about the fact that this had to do with vulgarity. This had to do with a teacher, someone who teaches high school kids, thinking it's appropriate to have a public-facing profile where they are calling themselves jacking off. Orgasmic drag king with a little squirting emoji. If you don't know what that is, put two and two together, right? Orgasmic squirting emoji. So they completely failed to capture the key reason we did a segment on this in the first place and go on to totally normalize it. A couple of things, I'm just going to bounce around to some of these stories so you can see, because here's the deal. We were perfectly content, like I said, letting this go. But now it's become a broader story about a few things that we care about on the show. There's no accountability for actions anymore. No one wants to take accountability for their own behavior. They want to play the victim and they want to blame other people. So instead of Kelsey Wayne taking accountability for his own poor judgment, he has to go on a media tour to make it sound like I'm to blame for his decision to have a sexually explicit public-facing drag persona, which is just ridiculous. And I think that's problematic of a lot of young people in this country in all sorts of jobs, that they don't want to take responsibility for their actions. The second element is how far our standards have fallen for public school teachers, where it would be deemed by some people to be perfectly acceptable for a teacher to have a profile like that students were able to discover. How have we gotten to a place where we're even debating whether that's appropriate behavior from a school teacher? And then the third element is how captured the media is. They will look for any reason to rail against conservatives and to drive division. That's what they're doing. They're going to act like we're the divisive ones. No, they're creating a divisive narrative that this is a poor trans person attacked by a conservative. That is the predominant narrative they're pushing, and it's a completely false narrative, and it is a false division that is intended to divide us where no such divisions exist. There isn't a division between conservatives and drag performers. A lot of drag performers are like theatrical performers. Conservatives don't care about that. They care when there's a line crossed between kids and sexually explicit drag shows. And that's very clear, but the media refuses to capture that nuance. And that's true in these stories as well. One of the things I thought was interesting, going to the stranger story, Kelsey Wayne wants to go on this tour. Oh, I had to quit my job. Oh, because Brandi Kruse is so mean. But the truth is, as the stranger reported, there was enough backlash against Kelsey Wayne within the school district and students and parents well before we became aware of it, that he had decided not to come to class for several days because things were so bad. The stranger says, the district didn't fire Wayne. They took leave voluntarily after their union advised them to stay home for safety reasons. And they stayed home when the commotion didn't stop. After a few days passed, when it seemed plausible they might return to work, conservative commentator Brandi Kruse obliterated any chance of that with a segment on her show, Undivided with Brandi Kruse. This is a quote from Kelsey Wayne. The district was already having a hard time with the community because of the initial Instagram post and then the Brandi thing threw kerosene on the fire. I literally can't do my job because the kids are only going to think about one thing. Then they're not going to be able to focus, and therefore I'm no longer able to be a competent employee. I hate that. Whose fault is that? Whose fault is it that because students saw your public-facing social media posts, you can no longer be a competent employee and the kids are only going to be able to focus on one thing? Is that my fault? Is that the fault of students who happen to find your profiles on Instagram? Is it the fault of parents who are concerned? No, it's your fault. Kelsey, it's your fault. That's where you've gone wrong. You refuse to take responsibility because in today's society, we don't expect people to take responsibility for their actions. But because you want to continue to raise this issue in the media and spin a sad sob story, then I'm going to continue to remind you that this is your fault. This is a decision you made. I would also note that it's a decision Kelsey made fully aware of the possible implications. In multiple stories, Kelsey Wayne is quoted as saying that he knew that if people at the school found out about his drag persona, it could create a problem for him. This is from the News Tribune. They say, and by the way, they use they, them pronouns. I'm not using they, them pronouns. In fact, I think Jack King Off's Instagram profile said he, them. Yeah, I'm not saying they, them. That doesn't make any sense. It's not grammatically correct. I'm not doing it. So I'll say he. But the News Tribune, so if you're confused by the writing, that's what it is. They never brought it up in the classroom, but told colleagues and supervisors about it when they were hired. The reason they didn't tell students and their families was because they wanted to keep their two professions separate, Wayne said. They typically do drag on the weekends and sometimes Friday nights. If students knew they were a drag king, that could be a distraction in the classroom and make it difficult to teach, according to Wayne. Again, whose problem is that? It could make it, if they knew that they were a drag king, it would make a distraction in the classroom and it'd make it difficult to teach. So Kelsey Wayne knew that as an educator and thought, well, they'll just maybe never find it. They'll never find out. Well, they did find out. And now you're suffering the very consequences that you anticipated you would suffer if they found out that you were a drag performer. So why are you suddenly all mad and doing a media tour to try to garner sympathy for an outcome that you knew when you took the job as a teacher was very plausible if people found out? Again, Kelsey, that's your fault. That's not my fault. It's not the fault of students. It's not the fault of parents. It's not the fault of conservatives. It's not the fault of transphobes or a cyberbullying campaign. It's your fault because you don't have good judgment. But going deeper into this rabbit hole of how bad the media covered this, it's just insane. Like, oh, you have a sob story about a conservative being mean to you. Come on in and we'll just regurgitate it to all our viewers and listeners and readers and we won't question anything. So one of the things I made clear on the show was the most problematic post from Jack King Off was a post, picture in drag. It said, lock up your daughters. Jack Goff is here. To which I saw that and thought what the parents who sent it to us thought. That's creepy. Lock up your daughters? You teach high school girls. And you're saying, lock up your daughters, Jack Off is here? And I said on the show, if that had been a cis white male teacher, is that cis heterosexual teacher, and a parent saw that where the teacher was like, lock up your daughters, I'm here, I would like call the cops and be like, hey, check this guy out. He's super creepy. So anyway, I expressed on the show that was one of the most concerning elements of this that made it much different than a teacher just doing drag at night. Listen to the extent that the News Tribune went to explain away that post that I just shared with you. This is wild. It says, that was the first post that Wayne made for their drag king character jacking off. 3 years before they became a teacher, they told the News Tribune. Kruse didn't mention that Wayne had been dressed up as a hair metal, a subgenre of heavy metal musician at the time, and the line "Lock Up Your Daughters" was a reference to a 1981 song of the same name by English rock band Slade. It also appears in song lyrics to a 1976 song by AC/DC called TNT. It's an allusion to a reoccurring trope in heavy metal and fit the version of the early jack-off character Wayne was performing at the time, playing off stereotypes of rock stars, they said. Oh, silly me. Sorry, I've totally forgot about the obscure 1981 song Lock Up Your Daughters by the very well-known English rock band Slade. Stupid. Surely the kids who were born in like the year 2000 should have known about when they saw that. Oh, it's not concerning. Guys, don't you know? This is a allusion to a reoccurring trope in heavy metal and fit the narrative of Jack-Off's early character. Nicole, I should have known. I should have known. The TNT lyric, from 1976, the Slade song, 1981. How stupid of me. Yeah, that's a news outlet that went to those lengths to excuse a high school teacher posting, lock up your daughter's jack-off is here. And nowhere in there did the Tacoma News Tribune, did Cairo 7, did The Stranger question Wayne about their decision making. Push back and say, hey, okay, it might be like a heavy metal trope from a 1981 lyric from a English rock band nobody's ever heard of. But don't you think if a student or a parent saw it, they might take it a different way? Right? That's pretty reasonable. That's a pretty journalistic question to like have any pushback at all. Instead, they launch into like why I should have known that this was some sort of reference to a song that no one's ever heard of. Maybe you have, but I guess I wasn't born back then. So all of that is just absolutely absurd. But the Cairo 7 story really took the cake for me. The Cairo 7 TV story, first of all, TV stories are so shallow and vapid, it's just hard to watch. I get this message yesterday from Deborah Horn at Cairo 7, who, I'll just say, has been the laughingstock of Seattle TV reporters for a long time. Is that mean? It's true. It's true. One of my biggest memories, and here's why, because she's the caricature of a TV reporter. The character of, one of my biggest memories of Deborah Horn, we were at a murder, a first appearance in a homicide case where a young girl had been killed. And she sticks her mic in the face of this dad who just lost her daughter and is like, how sad are you, basically? And we're all sitting there like, what are you doing? Like, have some empathy. Fast forward a couple years when the guy was sentenced in that case, the dad walks out of the courtroom. This is just a story to set you up on Deborah Horn. Dad walks out of the courtroom. This is the young girl who was shot in the neck and killed by a random guy who was just going around shooting at random. So you might remember the case. I'm not going to put him on blast here, but dad walks down. All the TV stations, including Cairo 7, are streaming live. And he starts by saying, I just want to thank the media essentially for, being on this journey with us and for their sympathy, except you, Deborah Horn. Literally, because that's how bad she is. She just will absolutely pull anything for a soundbite, whatever it is. So that's how I feel. But anyway, so Cairo 7 covers a story. I get a message from, what, Nicole? Does that mean? Am I cyberbullying Deborah Horn now? Am I wrong?
I mean, I don't know her very well. I mean, I see where you're coming from. Yeah.
She's the caricature of a news reporter. So there's nothing serious happening here. And I'm sorry, you do a half-assed story about me, I'm going to tell you how I really feel about it.
Yep.
Anyway, Nicole's over there like wide-eyed. It's fine, I don't care. So I get a message like 2 hours before they're going to air their story in the 5 o'clock news. Deborah, I was on TV. I know that a story doesn't come together at 3 p.m. when it's going to be on the 5 o'clock news. I know that you got that assignment at 9 or 10 in the morning. So she
was in Gig Harbor.
100%. You went to Gig Harbor. I know how TV assignments work. You knew you were going to do a story telling this sob story for this teacher without pushing back against anything he, whatever, did or wrote. And you had all that time, hours and hours, to contact me for comment. You chose to do it at 3 p.m. The only reason it was very clear that she contacted me is she wanted to use our video for the show, which I don't even think she had to use permission for. I told her no, but she could have used it anyway. That's totally fair use. I wouldn't have sued you. But it was like, didn't even really want, I sent a statement, but it was clear all she wanted was to be able to use video of me being mean to this teacher or whatever. So anyway, I was like eagerly awaiting. I wonder what kind of gem of reporting Cairo 7 will put on the news. Let's go through it, shall we? Here we go.
A Gig Harbor teacher is quitting their day job over online hate.
Yeah, no, they're not quitting their day job over online hate. They're quitting their day job because they got caught doing something that they knew they shouldn't be doing by their own admission. Let's continue.
The allegation is that the teacher posted about their drag performance in a sexually explicit manner online.
Yeah, that's not an allegation. You don't have to say the allegation is. He literally posted about his drag persona online in a sexually explicit manner. calling himself the orgasmic drag king jacking off. It's not an allegation. That's just what he did. Let's continue.
Kay Wayne says they quit because of what they say was cyberbullying by a local online conservative commentator. Is it hard to look at?
No.
No?
I've seen it. I don't care.
Is it hard to look at? That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. How corny is that? Is it hard to look at? What do you mean, is it hard to look at? Oh, no, I don't care. Clearly you care, because that's like the 5th media interview you've done on it, whining about it. So it's so corny. Anyway, okay, let's keep going.
As far as you're concerned, you'd be fine if they came back?
Yeah, I just think that online stuff should stay online. Maybe make your accounts private.
There you go. So the students have more common sense than their teacher. Like, hey, do what you want to do, right? Within reason. Don't break any laws, obviously. That's a totally different scenario. But if you want to be the orgasmic drag king jacking off, you should have done a better job taking reasonable steps to say, hey, I know this is going to be a problem if my kids find out about it, the students find out about it, teachers find out about it. So I'm not going to make it public. So even the kids know. Yeah, but hey, you should probably make that private. Wow. What a concept. All right. Let's keep going.
Out of work, but not out of options, that teacher says. Their plan is to apply for work next time in the private sector.
First of all, okay, here's the thing. You think the private sector will tolerate that? Public school teachers in the public sector, they tolerate a lot. There's a lot of things that they're perfectly fine with school teachers doing in the classroom and out of the classroom. It takes, especially as a trans individual, there's a lot that you have to do to get fired in the public sector. You think the private sector will tolerate that nonsense? Not a chance in the world. So if you think that's a safe haven for that kind of conduct, it's going to be much, much worse, because the private sector actually cares about, how they're perceived by the public and blowback and things like that to their bottom line. All right, let's do one more.
I did hear from the commentator Wayne accuses of costing them
me.
their job. The commentator says no one forced them to quit. That, quote, they made a choice to quit their job rather than face their students after their sexually explicit public posts came to light.
It's the only common sense thing about that whole story is my quote. I had to laugh though, because when this just shows the bias, right? It's more than me just ranting about like, the news media is losing it over a segment I did. I love it. Thank you for the attention. But it shows the bias in there, right? First of all, who gets to decide whether I'm labeled a conservative commentator? Who gets to decide? I mean, I'm conservative on a lot of things, but on like social issues, not at all. So they get to decide based on their own bias, like we're going to label her a conservative commentator. We don't really refer to ourselves as a conservative commentator. I mean, that's just what people label us, and that's fine. But she refused to say my name. So you saw it there on the graphic, but Deborah Horn refused to say my name. And in the written story for Cairo 7, they put a quote for me that I gave her on the record, but didn't attribute it to me. Just a local online conservative commentator. So I think there's a few reasons. They wanted to vilify me. Right? And they wanted to create that division where division didn't exist, saying, oh, it's just a nameless, faceless conservative who hates trans people. And I think they know that I have a much better reputation than that. And that if they had used my name and said my name in their quote, that there's a lot of people who wouldn't have bought it. They wouldn't have bought that divide that they were selling. Because again, when it comes to, gay rights issues, hell, when it comes to drag and all these things, I'm pretty liberal. And so it's much easier to say nameless, faceless, conservative commentator hates trans teacher who did drag. Again, that's why we call this show Undivided. This is the perfect illustration. People think we call the show Undivided because I'm going to get on here and say everybody just needs to come together and we just need to agree on everything. No, the show is an aggressive rejection of fringe ideologies that are intended to divide us. And until we recognize that, until we reject them, and efforts like this, we won't be undivided as a society. That's the quickest way we can come together, is if we spot things like this and say, no, Brandi doesn't hate trans people. She wasn't vilifying this teacher simply because they do drag. She had a legitimate criticism of a teacher who called themselves the orgasmic drag king jacking off and said, lock up your daughters and we should expect more. And as the media, demand more of public employees who our taxpayer funds pay. You get it?
They wouldn't even say the things we were complaining about that
Wouldn't even say it.
children saw because it was not okay for TV.
Never, Deborah Horn in the Cairo 7 story, online, on TV, never said what Kelsey Wayne's drag name was. Never said Jack King off. Never said orgasmic drag king. Why do you think that is? Well, the FCC probably wouldn't allow it. It was inappropriate for TV. So that's a big freaking clue that it's probably inappropriate as a teacher to put it on a public-facing profile that kids were able to easily access. So again, let's go through the 3 points here and what this all teaches us. I'm sure Kelsey Wayne just wanted like 15 minutes of fame for their Instagram account, and the media was happy to give it to him. The big points here in the big picture, it's more than just like, oh, this story complaining about all this stuff, whatever it is. The media, this shows the media's bias. 100%. This was about creating division and propping up this false narrative that conservatives hate drag, conservatives hate LGBTQ. This is also about the younger generation being taught that they don't have to take accountability for their behavior. They don't have to take accountability for their actions. They're the victim. And everything bad that happens to them isn't about their life choices. It's about things other people did to them. And I don't believe, Kelsey Wayne, that that's going to get you very far in life if that's the mentality that you take with you. And then finally, what I would say is we have to have higher standards for public school teachers. You want to do drag at night? Fine. Like I said, some drag performers I've seen, it's about singing and dancing. It's like the same as a theatrical performance. They're not stripping down naked or doing, vulgar gestures or something like that. It's fine. But you have to understand, you have to be very clear with the school, and you have to understand that if those two worlds cross, there might be problems for you, as Kelsey Wayne did. Kelsey anticipated this and then got mad on the back end when people found out, and he felt forced to quit his job as a result, which nobody told him he had to. So we have to have higher standards, but it's the media that helps amplify those higher standards. And if the media is not willing to have higher standards for public schools, I guess it goes to the students, the parents, and people like us to make sure that higher standards are met.